But nevertheless, we have three other engaging speakers for today. And the first one is Professor Ralph Maddison, who's Professor of Physical Activity and Disease Prevention at Deakin University. So Ralph, his work has focused on the design, the development and the evaluation of digital interventions. He has shown that mobile health and digital behaviour can change interventions that are effective, cost-effective modalities for improving lifestyle risk factors. His digital programs have been licensed for delivery in primary care and have been adapted for delivery to support the management of cardiovascular disease, which, as we heard, is one of the major diseases of this country. So, my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm a bit of a tiddler, so I'm going to have to move this a bit closer. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. And as mentioned, I'd just like to touch base on the sort of the programs of research that we do, which really around the development and evaluation of a range of technological approaches for enhancing self-care or self-management in people with chronic diseases, mainly in cardiovascular disease, but we do have done work in diabetes. And the idea behind the technologies is actually not to list a whole bunch of technologies. What it's about is actually trying to understand the needs of users and how we can address those needs by utilizing different technological solutions. And so today, rather than just talking about a whole list of solutions, what I'd like to do is just talk about one program of research that we're doing that's focused on heart failure. And one of the technologies that we are focusing on is the application of digital technologies in the home called smart home or smart health solutions. And this is an area that's receiving a lot more empirical investigation. And we recently completed a scoping review to sort of understand the characteristics of smart home systems to support self-care. Most smart home interventions have really been used in aged care to detect anomalies such as falls and to provide prompts and supports to take medication. Few have been applied to chronic disease. There's been some telemonitoring studies that have looked at people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a couple of projects in heart failure, but most of those studies have really been predominantly telemonitoring, and they don't therefore support people to actually self-care, to help the person with the disease to take responsibility for their own management. And I think this is the area that we're really trying to focus more on. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the application of technology in heart failure. As we know, it's a common condition in Australia, and the heart failure guidelines advise that early detection of heart failure symptoms and relevant treatments at an early stage can significantly reduce cost in terms of hospitalisation or rehospitalisation, but can also reduce the burden on people living with the disease. And self-care and health monitoring plays a critical role in the management of heart failure and helps people to early detect deterioration or decompensation and tries to avoid people going back into hospital. Riegler and colleagues proposed this three interrelated domains around self-care and try to define what self-care is. And they suggested that these domains are influenced by internal factors, so personal factors, personality, other needs, but also external factors, the environment. But most self-care solutions have really just focused predominantly on the monitoring element. So to expand, so self-care maintenance really reflects the activities that people have to do, typically have to do when they're managing a chronic condition. So, taking medication as prescribed, being physically active, and in heart failure, people have to restrict sodium sometimes, manage their fluid intake, etc. And also, so there's a lot of things that they have to do. The monitoring element is monitoring for symptoms or conditions, so shortness of breath, edema, chest pain, etc. But they also need to seek support, etc. And the management elements are actually the things that they are then required to do. So whether that's done with the advice of a clinician or they manage this at home, so they might need to adjust their diuretics, adjust other medications. They might need to change their physical activity level, adapt their diet, etc. And they may need to consult a healthcare professional. And as I said earlier, that most of the interventions that have been developed thus far are focused on telemonitoring and don't really help people with the maintenance and the management components as much. And so what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit through a couple of scenarios in how a smart home or a smart health system might support people to do both the maintenance, monitoring and management components. So I'm going to use a couple of cartoons to try to illustrate the potential of a smart home system to improve self-management and reducing preventable hospitalizations. So I'm going to present two scenarios. In the first scenario, we've got a lady called Myrtle who's about 70 years of age. She wakes up one morning, she's got heart failure. She wakes up in the morning not feeling quite right. She notes that her ankles are a bit swollen. She's not sure what to do, doesn't want to bother her daughter. So she rests, forgets to take her medication. Later in the day, she feels a lot worse and she becoming quite short of breath and is unable to walk to the bathroom. So she then decides to call her daughter. Daughter rings the doctor, calls an ambulance, and she gets admitted to hospital where she receives treatment, stays in hospital for a couple of days, and then discharged. And this is not a typically uncommon scenario where people don't want to bother anybody and then leave it too late. So in a scenario where potentially we might have smart digital technologies to support person, we might have sensors within the home, Bluetooth scales, wearable sensors, etc., that monitor the person and notice a 2 kilogram increase in body weight, so recorded by the Bluetooth scales within 24 hours. The sensors also record that there hasn't been any medication activity and also that the person's been sitting a lot more than they would normally do. And so that happens so that those data get triggered to through a back end, trigger a conversational agent. So I've used Google Home here. And that conversational agent communicates directly with the person and asks them how they are and gets them to record their symptoms. And those symptoms data combined with those sense data sends a direct alert to their clinician, whether that's a heart failure nurse practitioner or a cardiologist or a GP. And it indicates that this person's not doing particularly well and that they need support. And they can directly, through this platform, directly communicate with Myrtle and provide the support that they need. So that alert's triggered through the system, results in communication with her doctor, and the dose of her medication is adjusted, and a heart failure nurse specialist might visit them. And in this scenario, potentially a hospitalization is mitigated and the costs and burden to the person is also reduced. So with those scenarios in mind, that's kind of what we've got an NHMRC Ideas Grant, and the idea behind it is to develop a smart home platform to support cardiovascular disease or heart failure. So we've got three elements. So I'll just make sure, which is this is the back, sorry. I'll just go back. So on the left-hand side as you're looking at it, is the sensing platform. So this is sensors that can be embedded within the home, but also include wearable sensors. So it includes things like Bluetooth scales, medication sensors, wearable BP, but also the ability to record symptoms. And in that system, in the box above, they have a smartphone application and also a web portal that allows them to review their own data in very infographic formats. But that system also has a conversational agent that communicates directly with the person, so they can ask questions to them. In the middle bit, you've got the cloud processing where the data is taken, and through machine learning, it can learn people's behavior. And with AI, can send information back through the conversational agent to actually trigger conversations with the person and provide prompts, reminders, support, education through this system to help people, enable them to better manage their own care. And on the right-hand side, the system also has a communication platform, so a dashboard that allows healthcare providers to review data. Alerts from the system can be sent directly to a healthcare provider, indicating that the person, maybe their weights increases, as in that scenario, and gets them to communicate directly with the person, and also their care providers as needed. So in this system, we're using what's called the IDEAS framework, which is a rigorous design process for developing, testing and evaluating digital interventions. And the idea behind this is that you, most importantly, take a user perspective. You're actually trying to understand the needs of users rather than just come in with a solution from a top end. So the first part is empathizing and understanding the needs of people, defining the problems that they experience and how to address them, ideate solutions, prototype solutions, and then test those solutions, and then do rapid iteration to modify the program to really fully meet the needs of the users. And that's not only the person with heart failure, but also healthcare providers. So we have done a series of co-design workshops. We have done a whole bunch of interviews with stakeholders, people with heart failure, and we also conducted a Delphi survey where we tried to get consensus on the recommended functions that they believed should be included in a smart home system to support heart failure. And this is just published this year, and these are the factors on the left are really what they felt were priorities that the system should be able to detect and support people with. I won't read them out, you can read them themselves. So as I said, we've done a whole bunch of co-design workshops. We've done really a lot of work trying to understand the needs of people with heart failure. And one of the things that we wanted to do to empathise was to go and work with people with heart failure, watch them at home, see how they manage their heart failure. But obviously with COVID, it's been almost impossible to visit people with heart failure. So we've used novel technology to try to better understand how people with heart failure better manage self-care and the activities that they do. So they've been wearing, we've had a cohort of people wearing wearable cameras, and these cameras take images every 20 seconds, and it produces, thousands and thousands of images. And we've been working with a group in Insight in Dublin City University to analyse those images to really try to get a better understanding of the activities that people do, when they do them, and the context in which they do them, at home, outside, gardening, etc. And it allows us to categorise the activities that they're doing and gives us a better understanding of how we can do that. Within the platform, we're also building a conversational agent to help people provide support, education, ask them about their symptoms, give them support around nutrition, exercise and medication. Colleagues of mine at Deakin, Paul Jansen and David Scott, have been using a conversational agent to support nutrition, exercise and have shown really good adherence to this program. People really like the solution. They find that they can communicate with the digital voice assistant well, and these are older adults with osteoporosis. And so we've adapted this system for our heart failure program, and we're building that into our system. So now we have developed a full prototype of the system. So we've got the back end, we've got the processing side of things already developed, and we're working with the Institute, with the Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute at Deakin, the Computer Science Department at University of Melbourne, and also with partners elsewhere. So we've got the solution, and now what we want to do is start testing that solution with end users, iterating it based on their feedback, and hopefully next year be able to do a formal evaluation of this system in practice. But developing these tools are not without challenges. And one of the things I think is really important, I'm a behavioural scientist, and it's really important that we need to upskill in terms of technology and understanding technology, but also cross-disciplinary collaboration is essential for these sorts of programs to be developed. But that can be challenging. As a behavioural scientist, I talk a different language than a computer scientist or an engineer. And so we need to understand what each person or each group means when we talk about development work. And as we know, that digital interventions can be costly and resource intensive. And so we need to manage that well. And there is a risk of applying these sort of very adaptive, evaluative type approaches in terms of how they were perceived by reviewers for grants moving forward, because we know that funding is incredibly difficult to obtain, and if you're not doing your typical RCT, then reviewers may not be so amenable to it. So as a new field around co-design, iterative development, it's relatively new and may not be as fundable as other programs of research. However, our ideas grant is probably an example that it can be funded and we've made progress, a lot of progress, based on that funding. So I'll finish, just say thank you again for the opportunity to talk. I'd like to acknowledge all my co-investigators and participants that have been involved in this research, and also the funders of my research to date. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. Do we have questions from the floor? We've got time for a few questions. In the centre, have we got a mic? Yep.
Hi there, thank you for that talk. It was really interesting. I'm Kirsten McCaffrey from the University of Sydney. I'm also a behavioural scientist. I just wondered, this is a really wonderful intervention and opens lots of possibilities. I worry in our work about digital inclusion and in about how we don't increase inequalities by creating wonderful, fantastic technology, but ultimately ends up using by those who are affluent, educated, already privileged, but reach those people who really need it the most.
Thank you. That always comes up, so it's like, the number one issue. And I completely agree with you, and we're not trying, I mean, there is a digital divide and we need to be cognizant of that. I suppose what we've really tried to do with this intervention is part of our co-design process is to really understand the needs of users, what technologies they may be familiar with and have access to, and just to determine whether within the solutions that we're coming up with. So I've described a whole platform, but that it may be modular, so that we may be to give people functions that they can use in their home to support them. And for example, we are looking at, through La Trobe University, looking at a very, rather than using a broadband connection, using a network, relay network that allows packets of data to be sent, but doesn't require, it's low cost, and it doesn't require a lot of data. So that's something that we are very cognizant of and trying to address as we go forward with this work.
Flavia.
I was going to ask a similar question, because I think obviously these are fantastic proof of concept studies and they are needed and they have the opportunity to put efficiencies in the system. But I must say, when I was trying to understand how we might use different sort of devices, the evidence is fairly clear cut that people in lower SES, cold communities, and that are very, very low uptakers of it. So I would support that whole idea of developing it, but it's going to have to then be sort of get rural and other people involved, because I think that we do keep, these are really important programs, and keeping people out of hospital is great. It might be great for private hospitals, but it's really challenging.
I take all the points on board that people have said, but I actually think we need to understand that a lot of what's happened in the past is basically give people technology and say, use this. And we haven't done very well in co-designing and really understanding the user's needs and how we can utilize technologies to address those needs. So I think that's a really important point. I think the second point is that I think that we need to future-proof, and we need to think forward, not just think about, well, it hasn't worked in the past, therefore it shouldn't work. And I think there are solutions that can be embedded into people's lives that can actually make a difference, that are really passive, and that they can collect data and support people without them having a lot of technical knowledge or know-how, even or resources. So I think that we can do things differently than what we've done. And I think if we think that low SES or cool populations can't utilize these technologies and therefore we're never going to give them, then I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. I think we need to be thinking more about really going to these populations and actually trying to understand, how can we help you? And that's kind of the philosophy that we've been trying to take here. We are actually working with regional and rural population sites and hospitals, and we are recruiting from those sites and doing our co-design workshops with them. And most groups have actually been very, very responsive and have asked that we don't have a package, but more of a modular type tools that best match their needs at any given time. And they can pick and choose from those solutions, rather than saying, you're just going to get the whole thing.
Thank you, David. Ralph, sorry. Sorry, Ralph, thank you. Okay, so the next speaker is Svetha Venkatesh. She is also from Deakin University and is online. She's an Alfred Deakin professor in the Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute, and I believe she knows Ralph and works with him as well. But Svetha and her team have tackled a wide range of problems of societal significance, including the critical areas of autism, security, and aged care. The outcomes have impacted community and involved into publications, patents, tools, and spin-off companies. She's tackled complex pattern recognition tasks by drawing inspiration and models from widely diverse disciplines, integrating them into rigorous computational models and innovative algorithms. Svetha, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Zoom.
Thank you very much. Thank you and I'm sorry I can't be there today. It was a bit of a flood situation out here, so thank you very much. So I just want to, I'm a computer scientist and I am the co-director of the Applied AI Institute. We're one of the largest AI institutes in Australia. And essentially, we have half the people who are machine learning and software engineering experts and the other half who are software engineers. So we go from ideas to building technologies. So I want to spend the sort of my 15 minutes on talking about whether, how can AI really help? And I think most of the audience will be very familiar with the kind of machine learning that we can do with large data. So we have large corpus of connected or even disconnected diverse data. And right now we have the tools and technologies to find patterns in them, to make predictions, to, make very, very interesting tools. But I don't want to talk about this. We do a lot of work in this, but what I want to talk about is lean data. And this is data that is expensive to get. And such is the data when you're doing an experiment, when you're designing something new. And what we need then is agile AI to deal with this kind of lean data. And what this kind of methods can do is disrupt the way we can innovate itself. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our work in this space. So this kind of lean AI, current systems which are being used in clinical applications are really not very agile, and they get trained on one corpus and then they have to keep going like that. It cannot adapt or change or customize. And really what we want to do is we want to provide this kind of rapid, continuous resilience and agility in clinical applications and deliver this capacity for personalized care using, as I said, lean data, because actually in very few cases you can have a lot of data. So what is the machine learning? I'll just use a couple of slides to describe what that is. It's really disrupting how we innovate. And essentially it's, I'm sorry about this. Experimentation drives scientific inquiry. So essentially what we do is we perform an experiment, we measure the result, we change the control variables, and we do this. And this is what is called the scientific method. And it's a basis of all the design of almost all products, materials, processes. So why is this hard? And this is hard because it's hard to know what to change and hard to explore all combinations when the number of variables becomes very high, when the number of things you're combining or you want to study become very high. And to illustrate this, I have a small graph where you have the x-axis is the number of variables required, the y-axis is the number of experiments required. If you have only 3 or 4, you can use simple charts. That's good enough. Excel will do. If you have something like 6 or 7 variables, then you have to use the design of experiment methods, which was invented around the Second World War. But if you have more than that, then what happens is that this will grow exponentially. You just can't do it. So this is where machine learning comes in. So it comes up with these adaptive experimental design Bayesian methods that can grow more gracefully as the number of variables increase. So what does this do for us is essentially there's a lower developmental cost and faster entry to market or clinical application. So so what are these kind of lean data problems in clinical design? So I'm going to talk about two main areas. The one is RCTs and can they be accelerated? And the second one is, can we accelerate the experimental design process in clinical research itself? And I'm just going to talk about the work that we have done. So RCT is the gold standard of clinical trials, and essentially equal numbers of participants are assigned to each group and on the control group. But the thing is that some treatments may have low variance, and in general, such may not require the same number of participants to be allocated to them to determine their statistical significance. So what we propose instead is, based on lean data, this kind of adaptive trial, which is an efficient, flexible way of doing experimental design, such that you can reduce the number of participants in the trial and the length of the trial, and you can use scheduled interim analysis and pre-specified rules in order to adapt the trial. So I won't go much into the computer science behind it, but I'll just give the applications and our partners with whom we have done this piece of work. So the key aim of such trials is to optimally allocate participants. And the idea is to get the best power, ability to detect even the smaller effect sizes, use a participant's context to determine the best treatment for that individual. So personalization comes for free, actually, in this, and rank the significance of treatments for various cohorts of participants. So our solution in computer science is called the multi-arm bandit, and it's essentially, you can think of it as a very sample efficient way of selecting a treatment for allocating to a participant. And you collect the context of the participant, and in the case of the kind of trials we're doing, there could be age, sex. In the case of mental health, they could be DAS scores, and these would help the algorithm adapt to what kind of treatment they want to allocate to a particular person. So I'm going to give two examples. The first one is increasing exercise prescription. This is in collaboration with Professor Steve Allender at the Institute of Health Transformation at Deakin. And what they wanted to do was get GPs to write more exercise scripts for their patients. And they had about 7 or 8 strategies that they wanted to evaluate. So essentially, if you look at the factorial design, which is on the left of this, there are about 256 separate experimental conditions. And essentially, it would take 2 to 3 years to figure out which one's the best. And in our case, we use this multi-arm bandit that I'm telling you, I just told you about. And essentially, we were able to come up with a good result in about 8 to 9 weeks. And we actually did this trial in Geelong with 8 clinics and over 11,000 conversations that were recorded during that period. So how does it kind of work? And I'll just show you this diagrammatically. You start with you can consider each one of these colors, these Gaussian distributions, as some kind of belief you have. It's a Gaussian distribution over a particular arm, which is a particular treatment in this case. So what you do is you allocate participants, you get the result, and then you update your belief. So once you updated your belief, a new set of participants, a new set of treatments is then allocated, but it is now sampled from this updated belief. So essentially what we were able to find is we were able to find the top few strategies. We had the accurate P value for that, and this work is published in Nature Digital Medicine. And the second, this is a much bigger trial, is in partnership with my friend, Professor Helen Christensen and the Black Dog Institute. And this is optimizing clinical trials to identify effective mental health interventions. And the trial is called Vibe Up. So the goal is to identify the best treatment choice for mild, moderate, or severe score of DAS, which is the depression, anxiety, and stress scores. There are 3 treatment choices. And what happens is, and we will do 12 mini trials, where each mini trial is for a 2-week period. And we have more than 1,000 participants in that trial. We've also made this digital platform at our institute, which is called the Conductor Platform. And it's a way, it really is the back-end scaffolding for people to do these kind of trials. So you have the researcher, they can design the study, they can deploy it on the phone, collect the data. And then if you want to work on optimizing the trial, optimizing the treatments, we can do that in this as well. So very happy to talk to anybody who'd be interested in this underpinning that we have produced. So in this particular study, as I said, we have 3 treatment choices and controls. And what you do is you recruit the population, the algorithm assigns the treatments, we measure the outcome in 2 weeks, it updates the algorithm, and the next mini trial is conducted. We haven't finished the trial yet. It's scheduled to finish at the beginning of next year. So again, this is just another way of looking at it, is that we initialize and we are interested in looking at the 3 types of participants: low, medium, high scores. So if you think about it, they're almost like 3 different randomized controlled trials, but we're doing it all at one go. These are our probabilistic models, which you can ignore. For each mini trial, we recommend what treatment they should do. At the end of 2 weeks, they return us their scores, and then we update and we carry on this particular process. So that's sort of brings me to the end of how powerful these kind of techniques can be in accelerating the design of new interventions, which you want to try out rapidly and adjust your intervention and try them out again. I also want to say a little bit about accelerating science, which is, and in this is the work with Professor Gordon Wallace at the Intelligent Polymer Research Institute. And the goal of this exercise was to increase cell proliferation on printed scaffolds. So this was done in sort of 3 steps. The first step was to tune the settings of the 3D bioprinter to optimize the printing. The next is to build a model for that compressive modulus of that printed 3D scaffolds. And the third one was to grow the cell lines on the scaffolds and optimize it for cell proliferation. So they were like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 input parameters to this process, and the output kind of looks like this. The middle one is the proper one, and the ones on the either side are not proper scaffolds. So we have a printing score for this, and so we did. We applied our Bayesian optimization to that using an optimization function, which I don't want to talk about. But essentially, what we found is that the 5 gives you a combination of between 6,000 and 10,000 possible combinations that you can't find. But essentially, we were able to find the best composition in about 50 experiments. So we were able to consistently do this and find the correct scaffold that had to be printed. The next step in that was to, as I said, to build a model to predict the compressive modulus and to find the experimental settings to produce the highest cell proliferation. And that's the experiment we're doing now. So this is an example of how we are using the same kind of lean data methodology in order to accelerate an experiment and get to the target result much faster than you can do without these kind of techniques. And the last thing I want to talk about is we also, this is a big data approach, is we also use it for detection of, sort of prognostic detection. So in this case, if I can just play the video, this is, we are trying to do early detection of cerebral palsy by just looking at the movements of these infants. So the current state of art is an AUC of about 65, and I think our latest method is about almost 10% higher. And in this, we're working in partnership with the Cerebral Palsy Institute and the Early Move study that's based at Curtin University. So that's kind of, that kind of brings me to the end of my talk, and I'd be very happy to collaborate and work with any of you, and you can just email me, and I'd be very, very happy to talk. So happy to take questions.
Thank you, Svetha. So we covered a lot of ground there. Are there any questions from the audience to Svetha? James.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that one's on, is it? Yeah, thanks very much, Svetha. That was really interesting. I guess mine's a more general question in terms of, for those of us who don't use AI, the barrier or to enter, to collaborate is, and what sort of timeline are you looking at to develop models for some of these systems? Obviously, some will be quite complex and others will be more straightforward, but would you mind just outlining that process and how, as researchers, health professionals, we would engage in these AI approaches?
Yeah, sure. So typically, I mean, this is what has happened to us in the past, is that you approach me or somebody from my team, it doesn't matter, and it depends on what you want to do. If you have a lot of data and you're trying to develop some understanding of the patterns that are in the data so that you can predict something or detect some abnormality or something, I would say that now, if you have lots of data, there are very mature methods that can do it, and we would be able to help you, do that kind of work. And they're not fast, but it shouldn't take too much time, right? It should. I mean, these methods exist, and if you have the data, we can work out a program to do it. I have to say that these methods are different from, sort of running regressions and things like that. So it's not very easy to. It's not very easy for you to run them yourself. So I would definitely. I would recommend, working with some kind of a machine learning or a computer scientist on this. And if you wanted to use the lean data, so if you wanted to accelerate your experiments or run a clinical trial that you want to accelerate, then again, contacting us and working out a program of work would be the way to do. It's not, I think, I wouldn't recommend you duplicating the AI, or it's as you say, there's a lot of stuff that goes behind it, and maybe collaboration is a better way to go.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question? Or, yep, last one. No, she gone. Oh, sorry. Well, she left her. Oh,
Sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
no, we lost you. I got it. There we go. Just
Yeah. Okay. I couldn't hear the question. Sorry.
Yes,
no, it's just coming.
it's
Okay.
the question is still coming. In early phase drug trials, especially in cancer, we're seeing Bayesian methods used so that there are not so many patient participants used to get to the appropriate dose based on safety and the number of adverse events. And I really like this because it's reduced the number of patient participants being treated unnecessarily to find the dose that's a reasonably safe dose. However, Bayesian methods seem to disappear after that in phase 2 and phase 3, and the whole thing collapses into normal RCTs with two groups. I just wondered what's happening there. Why hasn't Bayesian methods gone through? Is it the regulators? I don't know if you know about the drug regulators, what they accept, the TGA, the FDA. Are they not satisfied with Bayesian methods for looking at efficacy, even if they're happy looking for adverse events?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would suspect it is possibly that, it's probably computer science's fault that they haven't probably taken it through the FDA. But I will find out.
Okay, I think we'll draw this discussion to a close, and thank you, Svetha, for your presentation. And we're sorry that you're not here today, because clearly there are people who would like to speak to you, but you did leave your email at the end of her presentation.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
So the last speaker is David Winkler from Monash University. David has a broad formal training in chemistry, physics, chemical engineering, and radio astronomy. He spent 30 years at CSIRO researching the application of computational chemistry, AI, machine learning methods to design drugs, agrochemicals, nanomaterials, and biomaterials. His career has been in academia and industry, and as well as being well published, he is an inventor of 25 filed patents. So welcome, David, to give your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much. It's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation to come. It's as as the introduction said, I've been working in this, I guess, almost 30 years, AI and machine learning for design of bioactive materials and drugs. But the last 10 years in particular has been quite intoxicating. There's, as you know, a kind of exponential increase in the use of AI and machine learning across almost every sphere of human endeavour. So particularly in the AI machine learning application to drugs and biomaterials, cell biology, tissue engineering and so forth. Some of it's just emerging, but some of it's more mature, and it's just amazing to see where it's going and how it's going. So everyone's probably seen this quote, predictions from Niels Bohr, predictions difficult, especially about the future. So I'm going to make some predictions about the future, but I've actually spilled a little bit of water here, so I'm not sure this laptop's going to survive. Yeah, I don't want the laptop to die halfway through. That's it. I think I've got it. Yep. No, that's right.
Generate your own flood.
I was well prepared. Yes.
All right. Now let me do that.
Yep.
You
I think
keep
that's
going.
right. Yep. All right. So everyone's probably heard that statement, but it's actually only half of it because the other half says, but I think mathematics will greatly change in its aspect. So I think we're seeing that definitely now, that mathematics through machine learning, AI and so forth, some of the things you've heard with the previous two speakers is really starting to make a massive impact. So when I was asked to give a 10 or 15 minute talk on the applications of AI to biomedicine, I thought this is like a massive thing. So this is, as you can see, artificial intelligence, machine learning impacts on, well, this is not even everything, it's just a lot of things. So this is going to be a very high level thing, and also just with a few applications. I'm not going to concentrate so much on what I've done, but basically where the state of the art is and where I think it's going, and it's a very exciting future. So if you just look at machine learning papers, even on PubMed, you can see there's a nice linear progression there, but if you look at the vertical axis, it's actually a logarithmic scale. So there truly is an exponential increase in, at least in publications in this area and in applications. And as you're probably all aware, there's lots of other areas where AI and machine learning are becoming hugely important. I think on the couple of slides back mentioned things like self-driving cars and all kinds of things, social media, for good or for bad. So there's generally, at the moment, two kinds of AI, for those who are not really au fait with AI and machine learning. Where we are at the moment is really this kind of narrow AI, so we can generate packages that can do things really, really well, whether it's disease diagnosis or segmenting radiographic images or designing drugs or whatever, but they can't do anything else. Basically, they can do one thing extremely well. We're, I think, beginning to move into this general AI. So there's a thing called GPT-3, which is basically a huge neural network that's been trained on a large amount of human knowledge. And if you look this up on the internet, there's some absolutely spooky conversations between people and GPT-3 coming out with all kinds of philosophical stuff that you would not expect. So I think we're beginning to possibly get into general AI, but it's going to be much more difficult. But in the future, this is where people think it might go. You've got narrow AI here. We're starting to creep into general AI, and a number of people, Elon Musk, bunch of people like that, think we're going to get to the point where there's so-called singularity, where these systems, these general systems, get to be about as smart as we are, and then beyond that, they actually get smarter. So that's kind of where things may go. And just a few definitions here. Artificial intelligence is really this large subset of, I guess, computer science that allows machines to do things that people would normally do. Machine learning is a subset of that, and that enables computers to learn from data, find patterns in data, find relationships, and then use that to predict properties of new materials and new molecules. And then deep learning is a much more recent, probably within the last 10 years, very exciting, even subfield of machine learning that can do some quite incredible things, and it's starting basically to take over. So One of the innovations really is just the number of types of deep learning algorithms. These are only the 10 most popular, but there's a bunch of others that have specializations for particular things. So just keeping up with what's happening in the computer science field, the drug discovery field, the biomedicine field, really kind of does your head in, I guess. So what I can see really is, and this is, I guess the other speakers alluded to this, there's a convergence between automation, robotics, this sort of thing, and artificial intelligence. And it's driven by a number of things. One is the size of chemical space. The number of molecules that you could actually make that could be drugs is estimated to be around about 10 to the 60. So effectively infinite. Almost as many drugs are possible to be made as there are particles of matter in the universe. So there's immense possibilities for making molecules. We've also got this huge increase in computing power. We're getting to understand the interactions between molecules and materials and biology much better. And then we've got these new paradigms like deep learning and evolutionary methods, which I'll talk about later on. So I think the disruptive trends impacting chemistry and particularly drug design, which I was asked to speak about, there's high throughput chemistry, combinatorial chemistry. We can make molecules much more quickly and test them much more quickly than we used to be able to do it, thousands of times. When you've got this huge pool of data, then it's perfect to interface with these machine learning methods, because these machine learning methods are data driven. So the more data you have, the more diversity and so forth, the better the models will be and the more applicable they'll be. Things like deep learning sequence structure predictions. People have always said, wouldn't it be great if we could get a sequence of a protein and we could work out its 3D structure. We've now got AlphaFold, and there are even better programs than that now that can actually do this sequence to structure prediction, which could provide a whole bunch of new targets for drug discovery. We're also, deep learning is disrupting traditional quantum chemistry, which is able to make very precise calculations of properties of molecules, but only on very small molecules because the calculations are extremely difficult. And now we're getting to the stage where you can train machine learning models on data from QM calculations and predict things 1 million times faster. So even things like possibly quantum chemistry, molecular dynamics may be possible. We're also looking at if we can build a model of a property so we understand the relationships between drug molecules and their property, can we then play that model backwards to tell us what molecule should we make that will have a desirable result? So we're starting to be able to do that. And the other thing that's happening is that the whole chemical synthesis field is getting disrupted as well. People are turning chemistry into computer readable languages, which can then be used to program robots that can do chemistry reliably. And then the other thing I'll talk about very briefly if I get time is moving beyond machine learning. Another aspect of artificial intelligence is the ability to evolve materials or molecules towards some fitness functions, some properties that you want it to have based on Darwinian evolution. And ultimately, when you combine all this, you can end up with what we might call an autonomous drug chemist or whatever, where basically you give it some seed information, you have a robot synthesis testing, some sort of AI system, and you go around and around in a loop until you get the drug that you want with the right properties. Futuristic stuff. So in my own work, AI and machine learning here, but the drug, or I guess biomedicine related things, I'm not talking really much about this, but all the coloured ones around are some of the things we're currently using AI and machine learning for tissue engineering, for topographical biomaterials with deliberate surface properties, biomaterials, bioreactors and stem cell fate, drug design and repurposing, and like everybody else, we jumped on what we could do with COVID to see if we can use AI and machine learning to repurpose drugs for COVID. Computational nanotoxicology, cancer biomarkers is something fairly new. And then we also work in other areas like photoelectrocatalysis, 2D materials and so forth. So a few quick high impact examples, just a slide or so each. So I talked about the sequence to structure problem. Deep learning has revolutionised that. So AlphaFold and more modern programs can do that. So what that enables you to do is to generate a very large number of potential protein targets for structure-based design. Because as you know, when you do structure-based design normally, crystallization of the protein is the real rate determining step. So we can kind of get around that. The other one is accelerating, as I said, quantum chemical calculations. I'll give an example of that. The autonomous chemical synthesis and chemical probes using deep learning and evolutionary methods. And then I'll talk a little bit about evolutionary algorithms. So AlphaFold came out a couple of years ago. People have been trying to use computational methods to predict structure from sequence for a long time, and there's a competition called the CASP competition, where people are given sequences of proteins whose structures will be determined but not disclosed, and then they see how well they've done with their experiments and their simulations. And you can see on the top left-hand figure there, there's a dark blue bar. That's really the deep learning AlphaFold prediction accuracy, and all the other participants are the light blue lines, and they're way, way less accurate. It's the RMSD of the prediction. And you can see some examples here of some quite complicated proteins where AlphaFold and the experiment agree extremely well. So that's been paradigm shifting. So far, excuse me, there's been about over 214 million structure predictions. 35% of them are highly accurate. They're considered to be as good as experimental structures. Another 45% are probably good enough for some structure-based design, and this will only improve as the algorithms improve and the data sources improve. So it's a massive resource. Neural networks are also learning quantum mechanics. So here's an example. Using a density functional theory calculation for a molecule, 52 core hours, and ANI1, which is a neural network simulation of QM, can do the whole thing in 300 milliseconds. And when you compare the results of the AI QM package versus the traditional density functional theory one, you get extremely high correlation with an RMSD of about 1 kilocalorie per mole. So in terms of actually simulating biochemical systems, simulating how drugs interact with targets, this is potentially massively accelerating that process. So, because what we normally have is if you've got something very simple, you can use coupled cluster theory for a very small molecule. If you've got something much more complicated, you have to use molecular dynamics or something to simulate a protein. So what this is likely to do in using this technique is we're speeding things up by about a factor of 1 million. So we're now getting to the point where we can actually do QM calculations on proteins, which was unthinkable a little while ago. The next one is autonomous chemical synthesis and drug design. So basically they're coupling up AI systems with chemical robots and using AI systems to actually understand the chemical reactions that are happening, predict new chemical reactions, and then coupling those up with robots to make molecules. And one of my collaborators, Lee Cronin in the University of Glasgow, is sort of leading the world, I guess, in this. He set up this thing called a chemputer, which he can now turn the chemistry into computer code, and he can reliably make, there's an example of a few molecules here, a few drug molecules that he's made recently from this. And he can also get it to invent a chemical synthesis, which didn't exist in the past. So that is, of course, underpinning the whole drug discovery thing. If you can do your chemistry better, if you want to make a particular molecule, an AI system can tell you exactly how to do it or even program a robot to do it, that's going to make things much faster. So in terms of evolving drugs and biomaterials, a bit like Darwinian evolution, you can turn a molecule or a material into a genome. You can then mutate it in the normal way, make examples of it, and go through a feedback loop where you can actually improve the properties of the molecule using an evolutionary process. And there's some examples there where a molecule has been broken down into different fragments. These fragments are encoded in particular ways as genomes, and you can measure the fitness of the molecules, pick the best of those, mutate them, create a new population and go around this cycle until you get an improved molecule or what you want. I'll skip that. So we're also moving to something as chemistry as a service and autonomous chemists, which I worked on, I mentioned before. So there already is chemistry as a service in some cases. You can say, I want a particular molecule, and you can get on the internet and say, a bit like dialing up a peptide or something, you can say, I want this particular molecule made on demand, and people can quote you or do that for you in some cases, and I think that will probably grow. And this autonomous chemist idea will probably grow as well, the convergence of AI and robots. So an example of the chemistry on demand is this IBM system involving artificial intelligence, robotics and cloud technology, which is, as I said, enables you to specify what molecule you want to make, and they can go away and do it for you. So the impacts. So we're generating these what are called data lakes because of the robotics and automation, and that is providing fantastic resources for machine learning and AI models. There's a paradigm shift in how we simulate materials because quantum mechanics can now be simulated by AI systems as well and do things much more quickly and accurately. We can detect, we can predict outcomes of chemical reactions and find viable reactions for molecules very quickly rather than necessarily relying on the skills of a chemist. There's I think we'll see greater use of evolutionary methods. I think people are now concentrating on machine learning, but I think evolutionary methods, evolving a molecule or material, will be probably the next big thing that'll happen. And eventually we'll have more of these adaptive autonomous systems, either for biomaterials or for drugs. And so I think someone asked about access and democratisation of these technologies, and certainly I think these technologies will greatly reduce the cost and it will democratise chemical synthesis by the methods that I've mentioned before, and also democratisation of deep learning methods. A lot of these codes are now open source. People can get them, even people in third world countries that maybe don't have large research grants can still start working in these spaces. So I think we'll see a lot of this happening, which is really good. And we'll get, I think, eventually bespoke, evolved robotic systems for specific applications. Of course, it's not all good. There's lots of limitations, particularly relating to the amount of data, the bias in the data, lack of expertise, training, and so forth. So we need to be aware of that as well. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, David. That was absolutely wonderful. You first question, and then I've got one. Yes, go. We do have time. We started it a little bit late.
So two questions, if I can. First thing, in the chess world, we had Stockfish, which was all based on human algorithms, just did them better and faster. And then along came AlphaZero, created its own algorithm, wiped the floor with Stockfish. And in that situation, because there's a board and there's sort of metaphorical pieces and things like that, humans were able to sort of learn the AI algorithms that the AI created out of fresh air. So the first question really is how, in such complex scenarios as you're dealing with all of the sort of examples that you showed on that screen, what's the venue for learning there for humans, and do we even bother? Is it just too complicated for us to sort of comprehend?
I think that's a very good question. People always say machine learning models are black boxes, so how can you understand what's going on? So part of my recent work has been trying to understand how you can unpick a deep learning algorithm and work out what features in a molecule, for instance, a drug molecule, it's paying attention to. So you can now start to back out of some of these models the things that are important for drug discovery in particular. I think what the other interesting, so that I guess is one answer to it. Is that okay?
Right. I mean, I guess you just press print, do you, and the answer comes out. The other thing is, in the scenario where both the molecule and the synthesis are created within the computer. Who do I license that technology from?
Well, that again, comes
Who
to a
holds
very,
the patent? Yeah.
I was going to say, it comes to a very interesting question. I remember going to Swinburne once. They have these, Tom Sperling runs these gets people in to talk about things like this. And the whole question came up is if an algorithm invents a molecule, and this has already come up with the rather bizarre looking but very effective antennae for spacecraft that was invented by an evolutionary algorithm. I mean, the algorithm was invented by a machine. Does the machine become the inventor? And I think one answer to that was, well, when someone takes a fantastic photograph, the camera doesn't become the copyright owner of the photograph. It's the person who's holding the camera and pointing it in the right direction and clicking at the right time. So that's one possible solution to that. I don't know. I think it's going to get really difficult though, because some of these innovative things that are coming out, and even with AlphaGo, when the algorithm beat the best AlphaGo person in the world, he beat them at one point because it made a move that was so unhuman that it's completely floored the guy. He just couldn't see that coming out of left field. So we're going to see more of these surprises, I think. And I'm really interested in the convergence between AI and machine learning models as they get bigger and more complex, like GPT-3 and so on, and then human cognition and brain function and consciousness and self-awareness and that kind of thing, and to see if there's a kind of, they're growing together. I think that's a very interesting area.
So I have a question that's slightly different. So in the cancer field, you can see how the impact on drug screening, identifying targets, etc., and designing the drugs. But what inevitably always happens is that you end up with drug resistance when it goes into the patient. So if these are smarter than we are you able to actually predict how resistance is going to occur and then go back and make sure that that doesn't actually happen in the design of the molecule or drug that you're seeking to develop? You haven't thought about resistance?
I have. There's kind of multiple ways you can look at that. I mean, the AI system, given the right kind of data, the AI system can probably pull a pattern out. And if you say, I want a molecule that doesn't have resistance or has less resistance, if you feed it the right data, it's possible it might suggest something. But you might also use an AI system to understand the mechanisms of resistance and those points where you can impact on those mechanisms. And then have polypharmacy, and polypharmacy obviously works better than monotherapy. So it may be able to work out how to give you a combination of drugs that maybe you haven't thought of that gives you much better effect on resistance than you would otherwise know, because there's so many parameters that a human brain can't handle more than about 3 or 4, as I think someone pointed out. And this may be 15 or 20 parameters driving this. The AI system can see the pattern, but we can't.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I think, you want one last question, very quickly.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting, very exciting of the AI field. Just as a question, AI has been, particularly machine learning, has been very efficient for pattern recognition to enhance or facilitate the screening. And I was wondering whether there's a case, or in your opinion, to see we can use the AI or machine learning to understand more of the fundamental knowledge or rule of chemistry and chemical engineering.
If I understand that question correctly, you can certainly use an AI system to perhaps understand chemical mechanisms in chemical synthesis and potentially biochemical mechanisms. Again, it depends on what you're measuring. If you're measuring relevant, because the model has to be built on data, and if you're able to measure enough relevant data, and you can use some of these adaptive systems like active learning where you can actually minimise the amount of data you need to use. But if you can get the right kind of data, and importantly, because you can measure so many parameters, if you can strip out the irrelevant or less relevant ones, it makes it much easier to understand what's going on. So in principle, you could model mechanistic information and find out what are the key, where there's a number of pathways, which are actually the key pathways that are important and the other ones don't matter very much. Or if it's a molecule, if you're trying to devise a synthesis, the AI system might develop a better synthesis for a molecule. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah, I think it's really comes down to if you can measure enough relevant information or data to train a model, then in principle the model can get there. I'm glad I wasn't a whole glass of water.
Okay, on that note, I think we'll end this really exciting session and thank all of the speakers.